The Anchorage Northern Knights, it's a fish out of water tale that wouldn't be replicated until Dr. Joel Fleischman found himself marooned in Cicely, Alaska.
So what's your problem?
I think his teeth hurt.
The Beavers?
A team in the state of Alaska playing in the Eastern Basketball Association. It is a story so rich that even Sports Illustrated had to go out and cover its first game. In the 5 seasons that followed, the Northern Knights would make the playoffs 4 times and even win a championship. Not just any championship, Alaska's first pro sports championship. The heroics were overshadowed by the team's constant struggle to survive. Even in the absolute best of times, ownership still lost money. The huge extra expenses incurred by fielding a professional sports team in Alaska were onerous and almost impossible to overcome. That would play a key role in the downfall of the Anchorage Northern Knights. But there's another element here that's also worth discussing, because as the team was approaching its end, one of 4 co-owners was arrested for running one of the most confusing, uninspired pyramid schemes imaginable, most likely to offset the debts he'd been racking up because of the basketball team. This is the story of the Anchorage Northern Knights, Alaska's very first professional sports franchise. This video is the latest in my Choose Your Own Adventure December series, where I let viewers select the topics I cover. This video was submitted by an anonymous viewer, but I want to thank that person because boy, oh boy, was this a fun story to cover. The Eastern Basketball Association lived a very modest life in the 1970s, although technically it was the longest continuously running pro basketball league in America at this point in time. The small regional operation also served as sort of a de facto minor leagues for both the NBA and ABA. Teams were located in the not-so-bustling metropolises of Allentown, Pennsylvania and Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and there was even one on the Jersey Shore.
Alright, we got a situation.
Who needs DTF when you have EBA? Anyway, when the ABA merged with the NBA at the conclusion of the 1975-76 season, those running the so-called minor leagues sensed that there was a gap in a market they could potentially exploit. If they could expand into more cities, they could potentially develop into an official minor league for the NBA. Most of this expansion, though, happens on the East Coast. It was simply growing their regional footprint, New York, Washington, D.C., and upwards to New England. However, the league had caught the attention of an ownership group that was way out west and also way up north, Anchorage, Alaska. A little over 2 months before the 1977-78 season is set to start, Rick Smith and a few other local officials start working feverishly to come up with the $18,000 needed to enter a team into the EBA. They found a place to play, West High School, and I know what you're going to say. You're going to hear the words high school and think that's crazy, but it's actually not as ridiculous as it sounds. Heck, even Ozzy Osbourne played at the West High School gym. It was really the closest thing Anchorage had to a big arena at this point in time, at least until Sullivan Arena opens in 1983. And every ownership group of the Anchorage Northern Knights is going to kind of pin its future hopes on that facility, but they aren't around when it eventually opens. It's also worth noting that a few games are going to be played at Service High School because they couldn't book all home dates at the West High School gymnasium. Money is raised by selling $500 deposits, which are going to go to season tickets, and eventually this group does scrape together the $18K needed. They send in the money, the Eastern Basketball Association commissioner is like, all right, you did it. The owners had already signed off on it, and there you go. Anchorage, Alaska is your newest member of the Eastern Basketball Association?
It's not as if Alaska was part of my game plan.
Before we continue, let's take a look at Alaska's sports scene around this time. They never had really had much in the way of teams of any sort competing with sides from the lower 48 and lower 48 base leagues. And certainly not professional sides. The Alaska Gold Panthers of Fairbanks and the Anchorage Glacier Pilots competed in summer collegiate baseball leagues. There was also the Alaska Gold Kings, an amazing hockey side based out of Fairbanks, Alaska. They did some crazy amazing things in their history. There's a great documentary about them, and I'll link to that in the video description of this video. But the 49th state never truly had a professional sports team playing in an American professional sports league. There's a very good reason why.
Money, money, money. Must be funny.
From Major League Baseball and professional sports organizations all the way down to the lowest of the low minor league basketball outfits, no team owner wanted to pay to have their team fly to Alaska 1 to however many times a season. In fact, the only way for the Anchorage side to gain acceptance into the EBA is by agreeing to cover travel costs for visiting teams. This, though, is really the cost of doing business. It's the cost of having something in Alaska. Look, Toktai, all the way out there in Glen Allen, Alaska, is really expensive when you compare it to other Thai food restaurants, but it is a Thai restaurant in Glen Allen, Alaska, of all places. It's not like coconut milk and pad Thai noodles are readily available. So yeah, Toktai is going to cost a little more, but that's really just the toll of having something in Alaska. And all things considered, it's still pretty damn good that Glen Allen, Alaska, of all places, does have a Thai restaurant. For the Anchorage EBA team, owners of the team believed they had a path to profitability, or at least breaking even. Now, that avenue was extremely narrow. It needed a lot of best case scenarios to play out, but it was there even with the burden of being an Alaska team around. Now, all those owners had to do was hire a coach, build a roster, name the team, get a logo for the team, get operations for game days in place, and find 2,000 or more people per game to watch some basketball side play in a league where their closest rivals were 4 time zones over. Bill Klukas is selected to lead the Anchorage franchise. He'd been coaching in the EBA, and prior to that, had experience as an assistant coach for Ohio State and Minnesota. As for what this side would be known as, well, ownership holds a name the team contest. They hate every last submission they receive and just decide unilaterally, we're just going to call this the Anchorage Northern Knights. For the record, I find having Anchorage and Northern in the name to be fairly redundant, but I'm not the one who raised $18,000, so whatever. Tryouts are held. The team inks an agreement with the Seattle Supersonics in regards to players, scrimmages, get decent crowds. The front office does its best to sell tickets in this league no one had ever seen or heard of up until 2 months ago, and it is time for opening night in Alaska's very first professional basketball game, professional sports game. Sadly, tip-off would be delayed by a few hours after players managed to demolish both backboards during pre-game warm-up, so the team had to go find new backboards, install those. Thankfully, the crowd of 4,000 plus people sticks it out, waits for the new backboards to come and be installed, and they are on hand to watch the hometown Northern Knights win their very first game in the EBA. I want to take a 20-second timeout and talk about the backboards a little more, because throughout the Anchorage Northern Knights existence, they use those rinky-dink semicircle backboards you'd see hanging above someone's garage. It just looks absolutely preposterous, even for minor league basketball. And yeah, they keep those JV looking backboards for the team's entire existence. On the court and in the stands, the first season is a successful one for Anchorage. The Northern Knights finished 24-7 and finished in first place of the Eastern Basketball Association's Western Division. They even managed to advance to the semifinals of the playoffs, but they lose their attendance for the Anchorage team is actually way better than anyone else in the EBA gets. That was assisted by lots of deals, 2-for-1, stuff like that. But still, they managed to sell 20,000 more tickets than any other side in the Eastern Basketball Association that season. Over the offseason, the EBA rebrands as the Continental Basketball Association, but rumored westward expansion is not forthcoming. Instead, divisions are split into Northern and Southern, with Anchorage still being the only team outside the Eastern time zone. Rick Smith would go on to confirm the side had lost money during its inaugural campaign, but he was really optimistic for the future. The ticket sales were good, and he claimed to have negotiated a deal with the now known as CBA on lowering how much he had to pay for teams to travel to Alaska. Klukas left after one season with the Northern Knights. Don't worry, he will return. In his place, George Milby would be tasked with leading the Northern Knights. The man from Maryland wouldn't make it until the new year, and then he's replaced by Ron Moore. Moore had served as a player coach during the previous season. Meanwhile, Freeman Blade would be tabbed as his assistant. Freeman Blade is a franchise icon for the Anchorage Northern Knights, and we'll see his name crop up a little later in the story. The highlight, or perhaps lowlight, of Anchorage's schedule is a 17-game, 35-day smudge back east. That marathon road trip goes poorly. The team loses a bunch of games, but then they do return home to Anchorage and just casually drop 183 points on Maine in a CBA record performance. Anchorage loses in the championship game this season, but there's a lot of speculation about the future of the franchise. The team has lost money. They lost more money in year 2 than they did in year 1. And there's some concern they're not going to make it. Over the summer, the CBA and Western Basketball Association announced a merger that would create a more national league. For Anchorage, there would be more nearby teams, meaning they would no longer have to subsidize the cost of teams playing up north, and it would also save them on needing to travel. Unfortunately, the newly christened United Basketball Association lasted all of 2 months. The hope was the NBA would give the league money, recognizing its importance as a developmental system of sorts. That money, that agreement is not forthcoming, and all of the WBA teams just decide we're gonna close up shop. A new franchise in Hawaii, the Volcanoes, is added to the mix, but that does little to ease concerns in Alaska about the future of their CBA team. Owner and team president Rick Smith opts to carry on into season 3, and there is one silver lining with all of this WBA business. It's that Bill Klukas no longer has a job. He'd been coaching for the Montana Sky, and when that team goes belly up, he opts to return to Anchorage and resume leading the Northern Knights. This would be Smith's last real move in charge of the franchise, because before the season begins, in 1979, he actually sells the team to a local businessman. The transaction is classified more as an ownership transfer than a sale. It's mostly believed that Smith just wanted to stop losing money, and he just wanted a local to take it off his hands, and that's what happened here. The 1979-80 season gets off to a weird old start. They open with a road trip that sees them going from Hawaii to Maine, which is just absurd and sounds diabolical, even for minor league basketball. You're playing the 20th at Hawaii, and then on the 22nd, you're playing at Maine. Woof. The team is also fined for tampering over some contract shenanigans that have to do with the CBA's weird setup with how teams work with NBA franchises. It's just all way messy. That would not derail this season. The Northern Knights get things turned around, and quickly they brush aside Hawaii in the semifinals, and then the crowning achievement in franchise history. In the CBA finals, they knock off Rochester and claim the title. It's a major moment for team and city. It's Alaska's first professional sports championship. Sadly, the joy would not be long-lived. Ownership insisted the Alaskan side couldn't play another season without more teams out west. While a deal with the CBA to lessen its responsibility for the travel costs of other teams had lessened the burden somewhat, it just wasn't enough to get the Northern Knights closer to profitability. The financial strain here was great. Now, there was some unexpectedly good news for all CBA teams in the summer of 1980. The NBA reached an agreement with the CBA, and that brought some extra funds for the ball club, even if it wasn't going to be enough to offset all of its extra costs. The new owner, Roger Jacobson, was adamant that only a 6-team, it had to be a 6-team Western division in the CBA, was enough. If there was no 6-team Western division, then he would either put the Northern Knights up for sale or he'd fold them if need be. There would not be a 6-team CBA Western division, although the league does find another workaround to placate the ownership of the Northern Knights. Instead of having to travel back east, the franchise would be allowed to only have road games against the other sides in what had become a 4-team Western division, and the Western division actually shrank in terms of travel size because the Hawaii franchise had moved to Billings. This meant the Northern Knights would only have away games in 3 cities in locations far closer to them. Jacobson also did make good on his promise to sell the team. This time, the Anchorage side found itself in the hands of 4 local businessmen, including one Terry Miller, and that's a name you're going to want to remember for later in the story. Anyway, the new season starts with little fanfare. Attendance and interest are down despite the Northern Knights coming off a championship-winning season. At one point in February, they gave away 500 free tickets at a local mall. And even then, that Coca-Cola robot that looks suspiciously like R2-D2 probably got far more attendance than the minor league basketball team giving away tickets, just saying. The team loses in the playoffs, Klukas leaves for a gig in Montana again, and eventually Freeman Blade is hired to replace him. Blade is the most connected person to this franchise. He's been with the team since day one as a player, and he actually had made Anchorage his home by this point in time. This makes it all the more sad when his stint lasts 35 days. Owners, or at least 3 of the owners, decided they were going to fire him and replace him with some high school coach. The entire 81-82 season just becomes an unmitigated disaster. Average attendance dips to below 750 people per game, and yet somehow, some way, things were about to become a whole lot worse. Everyone sort of felt like Northern Knights ownership was just desperately trying to survive until the brand new Sullivan Arena opened. When they had that newer facility, not only could they sell beer, which would help increase revenue, but the idea was maybe fans would be more interested in watching games from the shiny new facility as opposed to the old high school gymnasium. However, all of the losing in that 81-82 season became such a financial strain on the ownership group that it made survival look improbable, if not impossible. And that's when Terry Miller, and I told you to remember the name, Terry Miller, partners with a former Northern Knights sales manager to begin working a pyramid scheme. At some point in early 82, they run it in Fairbanks as well as Anchorage. The details of this are very scarce. We do know that in May 1982, after the season had ended, the duo was busted by Alaska state troopers in one of their hotel pitch meetings where they were looking to find new marks. Before we go any further, I want to talk about what they were trying to do because I have looked into it, I have studied graphs, I have read articles, I have watched videos on this specific pyramid scheme, gambling system, whatever you want to call it, and I understand it. I don't understand why anyone would be dumb enough to get involved with this. They're like, hey, give us money, and then we're going to split that money with someone above you, and then also somebody else gets half of that money, and then your reward is to get people to give you money. It's just so stupid. And the fact they found anyone to partake blows my mind. And yet, you know what else blows my mind is somehow this pyramid scheme arrest isn't enough to kill off the Anchorage Northern Knights. In fact, the CBA goes on to reinstate Miller as an owner pending the results of an investigation. That happened shortly before league ownership meetings, and this is where we maybe get where the straw that broke the camel's back, because at those league meetings, which Miller is attending, the league votes to stop covering the travel costs of Western Division teams to Anchorage. Teams would pay to fly to Seattle, and once there, it was on the Northern Knights ownership to pay for the sides to make it to Alaska and back. The cost of this, of doing so, were absolutely extreme. We're talking an extra $40,000 per year that would fall on the Anchorage franchise. Even then, this doesn't immediately see the Northern Knights fold. The ownership group hangs on for a couple more months before ultimately deciding they were going to sell their team back to the CBA for $100,000. The damnedest thing here is that Miller is the one doing all the public-facing commenting as the Northern Knights fold. It's so bizarre because he's like, well, the community didn't support the franchise, and we don't think Sullivan would have been good for us. The rent would have been too high, and we were losing all of this money. And he refuses to mention one thing: his ongoing court case for the pyramid scheme he was arrested for. Was that connected to the team's losses and the team's ability to run the franchise? We don't ever know. What we do know is that Miller is found guilty of running the pyramid scheme. He gets 60 days in prison and is ordered to pay more than $100,000 in restitution and fines. His co-conspirator would cop a 2-year sentence, although that has more to do with a previous felony conviction he had and less to do with the role in the case. There does remain one last twist in this saga. When Miller was arrested, he told local media, well, I thought the scheme was okay because I ran it by my lawyer, and he said it wasn't breaking any rules. And this turns out to be something. The convicted pair file a malpractice lawsuit, and it takes about 3 years, but they win $800,000 because either their lawyer didn't do the research and billed them for work hours anyway, or was just the second coming of Lionel Hutz.
That's why you're the judge and I'm the law talking guy.
The lawyer.
Right.
All things considered, it wasn't the pyramid scheme outright that took down the Anchorage Northern Knights. The team had been losing money every year it was in existence. And there were issues with Sullivan, like it's probably realistic that they couldn't even have afforded rent to play there. Then again, we don't know what was going on with the pyramid scheme and the connections to the basketball team because no one ever follows the money. No one ever follows where that was going. That was mostly due to the fact that Miller and his associate did not have any sort of paper trail. Everything was done in cash. They made sure that it sort of stopped with them. And that's why the arrest, the conviction, is almost exclusively due to them being arrested at that hotel during one of their seminars or whatever they wanted to call it. This is what prosecutors used for that conviction. So is it possible Miller used some of the money earned from the pyramid scheme to help cover losses for the Northern Knights in that final season? Possibly. It seems like a fairly realistic possibility. We don't know. And if he hadn't been caught and he's allowed to keep the scheme going for another year, maybe Anchorage gets another year of the Northern Knights. It's one of those things where, because we know so little about what happened during this case and the extent of it, no one knows the extent of it. There were people who came forward later and said, well, I lost 25,000 or whatever. So it seems like there is a lot more here that just will probably forever be unknown. What we do know is that the Anchorage Northern Knights are one of the CBA's most successful franchises, 4 playoff appearances in 5 seasons, a championship. More importantly, though, without the odd outlier franchise in Alaska playing in the Eastern Basketball Association, it's highly unlikely the CBA ever comes. It's highly unlikely their expansion during the 80s and 90s ever happens. Anchorage served an important purpose for that league. Everything really just tracks back to that decision to put a franchise against all odds, against most logic, in Anchorage, Alaska. The Anchorage Northern Knights aren't only Alaska's first professional sports franchise, but they're Alaska's first professional sports champion. Yet winning that title was more or less the end of the franchise. No one really seems to care after that. It's just they were at the peak of the mountaintop and everyone was like, oh, okay, this was fun. And then it was on to the next thing. Years after the Northern Knights left, the Anchorage and later Alaska Aces would come to town. The duration of that team, their stint at Anchorage, was longer than the Northern Knights, but they befell the same fate. High travel costs, uneven attendance, and being at the mercy of the Alaskan economy saw it fold in the 2010s. Both are still fondly remembered to this day by those fortunate enough to have seen them play in person, but also the Anchorage Northern Knights and the Alaska or Anchorage Aces serve as another reminder of just how difficult it is to make professional sports work in Alaska. Thank you for watching this video. If you would like to know more about the time Alaska actually had not just a college football team, but a college football bowl, you can check out the video in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. Until next time, I am Shine Hollis. This is The Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.